So, Papa, I never really asked you, what did you do before CTM?
Well, actually, before I got into the heating and air trade, I was a teacher. I
Really?
taught seventh grade math and science. Um, it's pretty interesting though because I was in a very rural area. It was a very low income area, and so we had a wide array of students. Let's say that there were some kids that were like A students, and then we had some kids that just didn't care about anything. And one of the interesting things about that was that in math, particularly, um, when we tested the kids, they had a range that was just like from second grade level to, you know, high school level. And the curriculum said that we had to teach pre algebra in seventh grade. And so, you know, think about what I'm saying. And so, we decided to separate the kids into groups, like based on their abilities. And being a newer teacher, I got all the kids that were in the lower abilities. And it really wasn't, it was kind of frowned upon to do that, but it was like, how do you teach all these different kids? And I remember getting the kids in the class, and, the kids aren't stupid, so we're in class and we look around, and the kids are just all a bunch of hard-nosed kids and, just a lot of kids that didn't care. And so I told them that. I said, let's look around. Who are we? And they, kind of looked around. I said, what kids are we in this group, right? Of all the seventh graders in the school, what kids are we? And they're like, we're the dumb kids. And I said, oh, we're the dumb kids. Okay, so how are we gonna deal with that? And I said, state curriculum tells you I have to teach you guys pre-algebra. And they were all like, oh God, like okay, whatever. And I said, okay, well, let me ask you a couple questions. Does everyone in here raise your hand if you know how to add? And they all rose their hand. And I said, raise your hand if you know how to subtract. And they all rose their hand. And I said, raise your hand if you know how to multiply. And most of the kids raised their hand. And I said, raise your hand if you know how to divide. And even fewer kids. And I said, that's all pre-algebra is. Adding and multiplying, dividing, and subtraction. And I said, do you guys want to learn how to do pre-algebra? And they were like, yeah. Sorry. But so we started doing that. And I was like, here's algebra. If I said 3 plus blank equals 5, what would be the answer? And they were like, 2. I'm like, there you go. Sorry. But for me, it was an amazing transformation, like to see what these kids could do. All the people totally didn't know, but they were dumb. They were stupid. So we started working on problems like that. And so every day I would be in the class, and I would say, okay, so this is a multiplying problem. I'm like, 3 times what equals 12? And they would say 4. And I'd say, okay, so we'd start working on simple equations like that. And in algebra, it gets to multi-level equations. And the culmination of the story is that, the other teacher had all the good kids. And so we put these problems on the board. And after, a number of weeks or months, we got to where they're very complex equations. And these kids knew how to do it. And the other teacher came into my classroom one day to borrow something, in the middle of class. And the kids were diligent working on the board problem, I called it. And he's talking to me that I were working on the problem. And he looked at the board and he was like, "What is that?" I said, "It's a board wood. They do that every day when we come into class." And he looked at me, looked at them, and he said, "Your kids are doing this?" And I asked the class, "Are we doing this?" And they said, "Yeah." And he goes, "My kids aren't doing this." And he stormed out of polls. And for me as a teacher, that was just fun of the, you know, I was so emotional. But it's just like, when you believe in people and what they're doing and kids, and that was, my life then. But, just, I so strongly just believe in people and, get into another level and believing in herself and knowing you can do more. And I saw that in those kids. And it was pretty awesome.